This course is concerning the largest organ of our body. It's the it's the skin, which or the integumentary system, using the big words. Um, but in essence, it's about 21 pounds in weight. It's far larger than let's say, the liver or the lungs, and by mass, and it covers the entire surface of our body. Um, One of the things you're probably familiar with is that skin perspires, it sweats, and that allows the body to cool down. It has what they call appendages. Our nails are appendages. Now you might thought, whoa, you mean arms and legs and ears sticking out? No, we're referring to things like nails in your hair. Also, the various glands that are embedded in the skin. Um, so to keep that in mind as we go through this lesson. All right, just a moment. Here we go. As you can see, it's already got it on the slide here, the appendages, so you can just write them down from there. Integrary means covering, so it's interesting that 3,000 square inches of surface area is the average adult um, surface area. So it covers the entire surface area, and it is important to understand that it is an organ, that the skin is considered an organ. As you can see, these are some of the functions, and there's another slide with more functions of the skin coming up. I'd like to mention that the skin allows us to be impermeable. Impermeable means our ability to keep out unwanted or undesired substances from entering into our bodies. And one of them could be as simple as rain. Rain, water just runs off our skin and it doesn't get exposed to the cells inside our bodies. And so we don't have an osmotic problem. That's where we don't have a refilling of our osmolality. Our pH values stay consistent. Um, and we don't affect the cellular level with excess water. Another thing too is that many people don't think of the skin as part of the immune system, and it can be, and it is used quite often with it. It has an antibodies property. It actually has lysosomes that can digest uh, germs and bacteria on the surface of our skin. So immunity is a very important role. It's perhaps our first line of defense against infections. Another thing that the skin does is it allows us to produce a vitamin that has recently, during this pandemic of the coronavirus 19, which is what this video is currently being made. This is the time frame for those who may be watching this video sometime after the historic moment that we're going through right now with this pandemic, uh, is the formation of vitamin D. Now, vitamin D is a fat-soluble vitamin. It occurs naturally in a few types of food, and it can be produced through the ultraviolet rays from the sunlight as it strokes our skin, triggering the vitamin D synthesis. It's actually being produced and made. The vitamin has many health benefits. Strong bones, it's absorbed calcium, one of the body's building blocks, is essential to the body as it performs multiple roles. Um, Promoting healthy communication between the brain and the nerves, for instance. And it boosts the immune system to fight off invading bacteria and viruses. That's where the COVID-19 virus comes into effect. Um, it's quite unique that if you have it has been related that individuals that have been susceptible to the COVID-19 virus have also had a deficiency in vitamin D. So if we get enough sun or if we take supplements, we may be able to strive off the infection. So that's an interesting aspect of how important our skin has in relationship to immunity. Um, so it's able to absorb special drugs to the surface of our skin as well. We can actually take medications with epidermal patches, and referred to as pain medications such as lidocaine, can be absorbed through the skin. So it's a pretty important organ. So let's go see if we have other functions on the next slide. The skin covers the deep tissue and prevents dehydration. The waterproof layer prevents dehydration because water is unable to leave the body by passing through the skin. Excessive dehydration will result eventually in death. So it's important that we stay hydrated and to remember to drink plenty of fluids throughout the day. Within the skin's epidermal outer layer are cells that contain a pigment, myelin. It protects skin from the sun's ultraviolet rays, which can burn the skin over time and can reduce the elasticity of the skin. And this is why we have premature aging. Um, it's important that if you're the body type that doesn't have uh, a efficient amount of myelin, then you should avoid skin because you'll be prone to sunburns. And sunburns is actually damage to the epidermis or the skin, and that can cause, infections. So they can be quite severe. A sunburn can be a very serious problem. Um, the skin also regulates body temperature. It doesn't just stimulate us to sweat, and therefore the water, the surface area is exposed to the sweat that's on our bodies, which is basically a fluid, and then it evaporates, and then when it evaporates, it expels the heat. It also has a blood vessel control regulation on the surface area of the skin, and it can either turn them off or turn them on, and it can generate and radiate heat away from the body that way. There are nerve receptors in the body that allows us to have a tactical ability, the ability to touch and feel and sense heat and cold. Um, when we run our arms with a very smooth, soft touch, we feel it. We can feel it as much as the brush of a feather across our skin. This is the tactical receptors of the nervous system on our skin, and they're quite capable of forewarning us of any future pain or problems that we may have in our environment. It helps us also to mobilize in our environment. Many people don't realize that we sense and feel when we're walking and moving through spaces and brushing up against items. We know to avoid certain things. We do it automatically without even thinking. But it's because our skin sends that information to our brain, and our brain responds accordingly. So it's pretty important. The skin is a very essential organ. The skin is quite remarkable in the fact that it's washable, stretchable, self-repairing, uh, and that it lasts a lifetime with minimal care. Um, the outer layer of our skin contains cells that are dead, which is kind of a unique thing to discuss, but the actual surface top layer is actually dead. It's 25 to 30 cells in depth, and they're physical barrier that keeps water and chemicals out. The epidermis has 5 distinct layers. Uh, Keratinocytes is the first layer. Is keratin. We find keratin in the horns and in horses' hoofs. Uh, and in this layer, it's the closest to the bottom. It's the bottom layer of the 5 that we're discussing. And you have a rapid making of cells are occurring in this layer. This is also where the melanocytes cells are at place, and millennia is being manufactured. The point is, it's not the number of melanocytes that you have to determine skin color, but it's the number of the melanin that has been produced by the melanocytes that determines the skin color. Then you have the spinosum, which is right above the keratinocyte layer. Going from the bottom, working our way up. The next layer is made of dosomosomes, shriveled spiny cells is the way I look at them in a microscope. They look shriveled and they look spiny. Uh, Langerhans cells are also here for the immunity system, and we'll be discussing those in a further slide. Uh, but this is where our immunity is apparent in the skin, and then where we can fight off infection. Then we have granulosum, granulosum. It's it's granules, little grainy-like substances. Granules hold a lot of protein and keratin handling proteins. They move the keratin around, and they move around. So this is a lot to do with the keratin, but it moves them in place around the cells and releases lamellar bodies, which are a lipid layer that covers the surface of our skin and makes it impregnable to fluids and water. That's why we're able to slough off fluids and water and oils. Um, then we have the lacridum. This is above the granulosum. These cells are dead and are clear under the microscope because they've lost, in case you want to know why are they clear, there's no, they lost their nucleosa and they lost their organelles inside the cell. So they appear clear under a microscope. And then on top of the lacridum is the strata cornum. The cornum. It can be about, that's where we get to that 15 to 20 layers of dead skin, and will continuously slough off throughout our lifetime, and as necessary, and as the layers build up, they push off and are sloughed away. What is unique is that in reptiles, it's called molting, and this layer will be one continuous piece, which sounds kind of gross. It's also kind of cool that they slough off the corneum in one particular event throughout the year, and that's where you get these dead snake skins and reptile skins, and they're pretty unique for a small child to see, and I certainly am intrigued by it, but they are considered pretty gross. So we're going to go to the next slide. Here's a fairly good illustration of the structure of the skin, and it has the epidermis layer, which we discuss as five different separate layers, is at the top, as you can see it on the left-hand side, epidermis. But we'll need to talk about the dermis, which is under that. The dermis is actually divided into two layers, and the first layer is the papillary dermis. It's connective tissue. Uh, it doesn't necessarily contain cells. It's very loose. It has actin and collagen. It's a very thin, loose connective tissue. So it's important to understand that the dermis is basically connective tissue. Uh, the nerve endings are in this area. It delivers oxygens and nutrients from the capillaries, and ventinels are also here. And they kind of get up to the surface area, to the very low area of the epidermis, where we once again told you about the keratin, which is numerous cells are being made at the base of the layer of the epidermis, and this is where it gets its nutrients from. Is it just permeates and kind of floats right up to the bottom layer of the epidermis to provide it nutrients. Then you have the nerve endings at the very end. The very end of the nerve endings are in this area, in the papillary dermis. Then in the rectilia dermis, this is a thicker, dense connective tissue. It's like the anchor. It's where you find the follicle of the hair. It's where the stability of the nervous systems is there. And this is it also has a adductor pillar muscle, which allows the hair to stand up when it's cold or when we're frightened. Um, it's kind of it's like we consider it the anchor, and it's very thick. Then underneath this layer of skin is the subcutaneous layer, or the hypodermis layer, which is kind of a cool name as well. It means below the dermis. Um, it's full of fat, and this is the layer that gets a bad reputation because it's fat. I mean, everybody knows that fat is bad for you. Well, not necessarily. Fat insulates our tissue and it absorbs shock. Now you can see this fat layer is right before the muscle layer that sits right under the subcutaneous tissue. And right below that muscle layer is, guess what? Bone. So this shock absorbing effect of the fat, it actually prevents injury. And the more that you have of it, of course, the less likely that you'll be able to be, less likely to be injured. You'll be able to absorb that energy and spread it out and diffuse it across the surface of your body. Now, uh, one of the things about skin that many people think, you can actually diagnose certain diseases. And the number one that crosses my mind is burns. There's a first degree burn. It is in the papillary part of the dermis, the upper part of the dermis. Um, but you can feel pain with it, and it does hurt, and it does damaging the nerves. And but when you no longer have pain, you're in the rectiliar dermis, which is below the upper layer of the dermis, and that becomes a second degree injury, and it's not painful anymore because the nerve cells has been destroyed and is unable to send the pain signal further on. Then you have the third degree, and it's going past the subcutaneous layer, the fat, and the muscle and bone. It's darker, and then, once again, it also lacks pain. And this can be classified, these different burns, as first, second, and third. Now, with this bit of knowledge, you can also be able to classify burns. So that's pretty much how the doctor does that. So we're going to the next slide. What we have here is the epidermal cells. We talked about the ketonocytes, the melanocytes, and then Langerhans cells or horns. Uh, but the Merkel cell, which is a sensory receptor cell, they're oval shaped and they're located in the dermo-epidermal juncture, which is the lowest level of the epidermis and the upper layer of the dermis. Is where the two join together. They're unique. They're post-meiotic cells. They're scattered along, and they are usually adjacent to a nerve cell. Several concerns exist to date as to their origin, their multiplication, and reliance in skin biology. Um, One of the concerns is that in some species, which is humanity, for example, we have quite numerous tactical spells. If you just, like I said, a feather was to brush across our skin, we know it's there. You blow a breath of wind, no matter how slight, we can sense these differences in our environment. Whereas maybe your pet, like your cat or your dog, may not have the same number of Merkel cells available. And they also usually have a keratin, which is a skin hair covering the surface area of the skin, and so the surface area of the skin is not really exposed as much as ours are. So their Merkel cells are less in number, and they're able to tolerate superficial injuries far better without whimpering and crying, more so than our as we do as our human sense. So you notice that babies, baby kittens, and puppies are able to be carried around by the nape of their neck from their parents and show little discomfort in that. And that ability of being able to hold a dog by the nape of their neck continues even into adulthood with little discomfort to the animal. Um, but that's a point. That's a lack of the Merkel cells. Now, Merkel was a German histopathologist, so that you'll know the study of an individual study's cellular structure. Um, and it's important to understand that there are differences in species. So we've discussed these cells in previous slides, and currently on this slide. So we'll continue on. Here the first one, as I previously discussed, is the Another name for this is the basal layer of the epidermal layer. It contains the keratinocytes. It's where numerous cellular mitosis are occurring. It also has melanocytes uh, as well as keratinocytes. Uh, and this is where I talked about the fact this is where keratin is, which is found in the hoofs of horses and things like that. Then you have the stratum spinosum. Um, this has melanocytes and Langerhans cells, which helps in immunity, and that was discussed previously as well. Then you have the granulosum, where the keratinization occurs. Cells begin to die and provide protection. So the order this goes is from the lowest to the next to the lowest, and you're getting closer and closer to the surface of the skin. You have the stratum lucidum, that's your palms and the soles of your feet. Um, and then you have the stratum corneum, that's the dead cell layer, the outer skin and the outer portion of your skin. And we discussed all five of these layers previously. So we will go on. Uh, we're looking at the dermis. Notice that there are two layers in the dermis. I discussed that earlier. It's connective, dense connective tissue. The inner layer of the skin below the epidermis is thicker. It has many nerve receptors. We discussed that as well as being in the bed. Blood vessels, the heat regulation as well. Now you have mast cells. They respond to injury, and I consider them pretty unique. The infection of allergies and histamine and heparin. This is how we respond to our allergic reactions, our initial invasions of infectants into our body. Uh, Mast cells are important cells of the immune system and are of the hemopoietic lineage, which is the stem cell that makes the red blood cells in our bodies, and they make various other blood blood material as well. So the hemopoietic lineage is where the mast cells derive from. They're present throughout the body, and they play important roles in the maintenance of many physiological functions, as well as in the pathophysiological uh, of diseases in the way we respond to them. Mast cells are found in the mucosal, epithelial tissues throughout the body. They are found in all vascularized tissues except for the central nervous system and the retina of the eye. Mast cells are located at the junction point of the host of external environment at places of entries of antigens. So it would be very important that mast cells be in the epidermis. That is definitely the entrance point to the outside world. So they're usually found below the epithelial and connective tissue, surrounding blood vessels and smooth muscles and mucosa, and the hair follicles. Here's a subcutaneous layer. Earlier I discussed the fact that this is the hypodermal layer, and it's basically fat. And I told you the cushioning, discussed the fact that it prevents injury and able to dissipate from collision and things like that. As you can see, it has an insulation properties as well. And this is basically a review slide. In the beginning slides, I discussed the appendages of the skin and how they're not the arms and the legs and your ears. And I discussed the fact that they were hair, nails, sweat glands, all your glandular systems. So they're pretty much covered here. So you'll understand. So you'll be able to have it in your notes. And that pretty much concludes the lecture. There'll be one more slide. This is where I would like to inform the students that they have numerous resources available to them. Um, in Blackboard, you have the faculty availability, which has resources to your primary instructor, and they're under faculty availability. You can find their schedule and their contact information. You also have a book. The Cengage has a website that contains the book with a search engine prompt. You can search the entire book from Cengage. That's very helpful as well. And we also have in the at UMA a library, our college library, which is very extensive, and it has a complete video, textbook, research section that you can use, and it's available to all students. And I would highly recommend that you use that resource. So thank you very much for this lesson, and I'm wishing you all the very best.